Consulting firm. Started up with these guys, and what we were doing was really delivering identity management projects for mostly in Australia. We did a couple of operations in New Zealand, but it was mostly across Australia, where all kinds of different industries, right, from government to banking to insurances and your small, medium, and large type enterprises, so all kinds of different places. Really from a delivery. And I'll tell you what, in the last 15 years, the whole landscape around what we do with identity management has completely evolved. It's shifted. At the beginnings, when we looked at identity management processes, everybody saw identity management as being a IT tool, right? It was like an ETL or a bit of a transformation type tool to get data from point A to point B, or to automate a process. But now, when we're looking at it, we're actually talking about things like business providing agility back to the business, right? Being able to change workflows and change requirements and adapt to the way that the business has evolved, and enabling more as part of that. So I guess that's probably something a little bit more generic for the entire IT security industry. And something that I'll actually be talking about today is, IT security, instead of being what was perceived as being a barrier or as a stopper in the past, has actually become a little bit more of an enabler in some organizations, and that's where it needs to evolve as well.
Yeah, I actually noticed this as well. A lot, I think a few years ago, a lot of people talking about, getting a breach or attack or anything like that. Most of them, they don't actually apply, the access or identity management is basically part of it. Because what happened was that about a couple of years ago, I met with some of the IT team from Hong Kong, the insurance company. I won't name name. She was there for 20 years. Her job was not IT security. Her job was, actually, she has a title. It's actually identity and access management. That was 20 years ago. She said that title hasn't changed. But her job got nothing to do with IT security. Her job was basically ensuring what staff getting what access, what customer getting what access, or anything like that. And she's actually part of HR, or then moved to administration, and then moved around and that sort of thing, and then now basically part of this big grand scheme of cybersecurity. And that's basically how it evolved. And listening to all the presentation that we did since last year and also today, we noticed that majority of the company are now going through digital transformation, meaning that payment company, transmissions company, or bank or insurance, all basically do things digitally. And it is basically, from the customer point of view, from the employee point of view, or supply point of view, you do need that infrastructure. Am I correct?
Absolutely, man. You're spot on there. That's exactly right.
And I know your presentations, today we're basically covering that and talk about various aspects. Because I think this morning you already heard that we talk about identity governance, we talk about digital identity, and the last, which is zero trust before we come on to lunch. So welcome. Let's basically, ladies and gentlemen, give a grand applause to Serkan Cetin that will basically do the presentation today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let me just figure out how to do this. Sorry, just a real quick check that my screen
No
is
worries, I can actually see your presentation.
okay. Fantastic. Just wanted to check that real quick. All right. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for all who've joined. So just as I guess a quick introduction. Serkan Cetin, I'm actually based out of Sydney in Australia, but I cover the entire Asia Pacific region, and I fly. Well, I'd say I used to fly quite often, almost every second or third week throughout the region before the whole COVID-19 outbreak and the pandemic. But most of my role has been actually assisting and enabling various organizations in, changing their process and what they're doing with cybersecurity and coming to a bit more of an identity-centric security solution as part of that. So, one of the things with this, one of the things we've, over the years when we've been talking about IT or cybersecurity, we've always talked about how the world is changing, whether it be some new buzzword or it be digital transformation or cloud or, whatever it is, right? The reality is the world has already changed. In our old world, we used to think about everything as being within our perimeter. All of our applications, all of our users, all of our systems, our databases, all of our networking equipment, endpoints, and so on, we're all controlled within this nice little tight box that we used to manage. Would have our building access control systems, would issue everybody with ID cards, would have everything within our firewalls all protected. Nothing can come in from the outside, right? And because we were inside this box, inside the Souls box, we trusted you. We're able to control what access everybody had from here. That's obviously changed, right? I know that, for example, within our company, everyone now is effectively a remote employee. So we're all working from home now. And many organizations are the same. So what we had in the past with this box isn't actually as solid as what we once had. Right, we're actually moving a lot more services and applications out into the cloud as well. So our on-premise applications and infrastructure and databases and the data that used to be within our corporate networks has shifted more into the cloud. And as we continue the adoption of cloud, we've seen the decrease of number of on-premise type resources. Most recently, everyone's definitely noticed our people. Our people have actually shifted outside of our offices. So from your internal corporate network, more and more people are now working from home. Or you may have distributed network environments, or you have a concept of remote employees. So you've got new challenges around this. Well, we don't have a single place to control all these, and they're not within our tight little box, but actually there's people that are spread out all over, maybe, in some organizations all over the world, like us, where people are accessing our resource and accessing our applications from multiple different points and need to be able to get access to those, and we need to be able to control those. That's just a very quick snapshot or a bit of a summary of, the reality of where he is today. It's not the world is changing. The world has already changed. We're already here, right? So one of the things with this is, well, where is the perimeter then? If we're still trying to apply the old school thinking or the old methodology around we had a perimeter access control, you're going to find that's going to be quite inefficient because, not all our people are within the same building like they were before. When we talk about firewalls, for example, our applications have actually shifted out into the cloud, right? They're all available through public internet interfaces. Our users are no longer just within our premises. And even our endpoints, Traditionally, a lot of employees would be using corporate issued devices, but a lot more now are using BYOD, right? Maybe your employees are using their personal device, a personal mobile phone or tablets to access company resources. So, as part of this, what the industry has obviously seen over the last couple of years is that identity has become even more important when we talk about cybersecurity strategies and holistic strategies for actually protecting our data, for safeguarding our applications, our data, and also our users. So, identity becomes really important in being able to provide that type of control capability and secure the applications, but also enable users to go and get access to those applications into the data and the different systems that they have. You know, just a quick snapshot. When we talk about security, what is security really? When we're talking about this, it's really about making sure that we're granting the right people. And when I say right people, I'm not just talking about a user and an administrator, right? But you also have different types of users. You've got contractors, business partners, third parties, customers, perhaps in your system. So it's really about making sure that the right people have the right levels of access. So based on the type of person you are, based on the type of persona that you're carrying, or the facet of your identity, it's making sure that you have that right level of access into those right resources, whether those resources and those applications and systems are in the cloud, they might be on-prem, or it might be hybrid, right? It might be spanning across the two environments or in a multi-cloud strategy. Being able to give that and make sure it's granted at the right time. And this is really important, right? In 2020, I was still going to many organizations today. I was actually at a company just recently, a couple of months, well, just before about a month ago, I suppose, and we're talking about how they're still struggling, with being able to provision access for an employee on day one. So a new employee joins their organization, and let's say they start on Monday morning, and they come in to the office, and it will still take them another 5 days until they figure out what level of access that they had. And that's simply the wrong approach, right? You really need to make sure that the access is provided to the right people at the right time, and also the right ways. So whether they're coming in from internally or from outside network. And finally, when we're talking about security, you need to be able to make sure that you prove that it's been done correctly, right? You want to prove that it's been done right. You can audit it. It's all captured within there. So what do we mean by frictionless security, right? So it's really about implementing security controls and processes which do not impact the usability of a system. So, if you look at this little like Dilbert comic strip that's over here, to complete the login procedure, stare directly at the sun. Right, that's a major impact to the usability of the system, and that's not what frictionless security is about. Where security was commonly seen as a barrier or a hurdle in many organizations, it was like most people would see security or IT security as being the necessary evil, right? There were the guys who stopped you from doing something. That's shifting, and that has shifted for many companies, and it will continue shifting and evolving as security and the business and the operations work closer together. Right? Ultimately, it will get to a point where security will actually become an enabler, and it already has for a lot of organizations. It already has come to that point where security solutions are what's underpinning and enabling a lot of the business processes to actually operate. So one of the things there is, you still find a lot of companies who are trying to find a balance. There's still people talking about balancing between the needs of cybersecurity and needs of implementing control processes, but balancing the usability of a system and trying to offset. They're even making some compromises, right? And making some trade-offs, trading off between having a secure solution versus usability, or impacting usability to enable more additional security. That's not what frictionless security is about. You shouldn't need to be balancing between security and usability, especially not now. Simply the user experience or the usability of an application or a system should not be negatively impacted at all. Users expect that they should be able to authenticate and authorize and get that level of access, and they expect it to be secure by nature, right? And really, like I was saying, when this is actually done correctly, when it's been implemented right, security can actually improve your overall user experience. So let's talk about a couple of things there. Yeah, let's talk passwords for a second. So for anyone, passwords were invented in 1961 by Dr. Fernando Cobardo. It was actually part of the compatible time sharing system, right? CTSS. Now, it was invented as part of that as well, it seemed like a very logical and straightforward answer to the problem that they had. The time sharing system allowed users to get access into the framework to the system for a specific period of time, and each user would have data in there. Now, being able to put a passcode or a password, I suppose, in this case, seemed like the logical and the forward thing to do to be able to control that access and make sure that everyone had the right amount of time. What's interesting is in 62, that was the first recorded instance of a password breach. It was actually one of the students, well, then a PhD student who was using the CTSS system, Alan Scher, who, who found a way to breach the system and extract all the passwords that were in there so he can have additional computation time on the system. So instead of having just 4 hours using multiple accounts, different passwords for all the different people, to have more time of compute in there. In a recent interview, actually, with Dr. Kavada just before his passing, he even mentioned that passwords have become somewhat of a nightmare. Um, and what it means by that is, there's just so many passwords out there to remember for an end user. Whether you're talking about your corporate applications and corporate systems, or your social platforms, or your personal email addresses, and you may have 2 or 3 or 5 of those, or whatever you've got out there, right? They've become a bit of a nightmare, and people are left quite often with two choices. You maintain a crib sheet, so you record it down somewhere in a spreadsheet or in a post-it note or some kind of system, or you recorded it within a program like a password manager. Either way, it's still a bit of a nuisance, right? To where this has actually gone to. So let's just think about it. For example, think about it within the context of your organization. So think about the number of systems and applications that you have across your organization, right? Whether they be on-prem, in the cloud, databases, web apps, Win32, Java apps, terminals, and so on. You've got a wide range of systems, right? And not each one of these systems are the same. Some are AD integrated, some are not. Some use their own identity and authentication repository, and so on. And then you've got a lot of different types of users. You've got your standard user accounts, you've got your privileged access, you might have external contractors, third parties, and different vendors who need access into your applications. They need access to obviously the application, but also the data that's stored within your system. And they get that access. They may be coming in from different places. Some may be within your premises, within your corporate networks, or they may be coming in remotely from their homes, or from their own offices. For example, if you have external third parties like service providers who are maintaining your application's infrastructure. And they're coming in from different devices as well, right? So they're coming in from either desktops or laptops or devices that are issued by the organization, or in some cases, they're using their own personal devices or devices that are issued by their own organization. Now, when you think about all this for a second, what's the one thing that's actually securing a lot of this access? It's just a password. So it's a combination of about 8 to 12 characters that's providing that level of security between the user and your data. That's what's controlling the action. That's your single gatekeeper. All right. So really, what we then did next to add an additional layer of security, we added one-time passcodes. All right, 6 digits, either in a fob or in a mobile these days. Which this is sort of the beginning of where the whole concept of frictionless security began, because you can see that by adding a one-time passcode, by doing something that was easy, and the whole introduction of the actually one-time passcode, where it comes from is that the user is already having to enter something into a keyboard, into the password field. So an additional entry into that is not so much different from what they're doing now already. So the user adoption is not such a great deal, or it's not so difficult to get users on board into that. Now, obviously, some of the earlier versions of this, doing this kind of multi-factor authentication type processes and adding these type of technologies on board, they're not as elegant and as polished as what you have today. What you can actually get to today is taking a step further, remove the whole process of the actual code itself, instead of having to read and type that code and move it into a mobile app. So where now, instead of having to type in your 6 digits, you can just push the approve or deny button. So you have a mobile application. Oops, you have a mobile application which just asks you a very basic question. You know, you're trying to log in. Do you approve or do you deny? Right? User presses the approve button, and that will let them authenticate and authorize into the application. Press the red button if it's not them, and that will stop that. This will continue to evolve as we start talking about things like passwordless authentication altogether, right? So there's been, things like WebAuthn, for example, or with FIDO2. As that continues to evolve and more applications get on board, we will eventually get to a passwordless state. In the meantime, though, we still have a lot of applications that rely on this type of process. So it's something that we need to continue managing. So here's a bit of a real example of how security solutions can actually improve your user experience. I just talked about there for a second where, the first one is log in without having to enter any codes manually. So instead of having to do that whole thing that, read the 6 digits off your little key fob or your app and then type in the 6 digits, 6 or 8 or whatever, however many numbers they are, you can actually do that all via a very simple process at the push of a button where you just press the approve or press the deny button, and then that will either let you in or won't, right? The next part is also you can actually extend this out to other resources. So for example, as part of an approval workflow, traditionally as part of an approval workflow, users will need to the approver would need to log into an application, see what's being requested and press the approve or deny button on that. So again, they're making a decision there, right? You can actually extend this capability beyond identity and beyond authentication and security to other lines of business applications as well. So to give you an example of that, so for example, the first part, we're authenticating. So a simple screenshot about showing how I'm authenticating into an application, and I have just a basic approve or deny button, right? If that was me, press the approve. Next part shows from a privileged access. So a user or a contractor is requesting access to a privileged account to perform whatever task it is, checking a database instance in this case. As the approver, as the owner of that application, I get, again, notification on my phone. Do I want to approve or deny this user's access to go ahead with this? And the third one there is actually around requesting approval for identity manager. So within identity governance technologies, right, with an identity manager, you have end user self-service capabilities, obviously. And typically with any kind of end user self-service capability, end user requests something, and then the approver, whoever that is, whether it's the manager or the application, whoever it is, right, the approver will log into the system and then press the approve or deny button. Well, you can remove that entire step of having to log into the system by putting that out to an app as well. So now the approver will receive a push notification. They can approve or deny directly through their app. So this is a simple way about how a security solution, right, which is a multi-factor authentication, is a 2FA product, a security solution can actually help improve the overall user experience, not just for the security part of it, but also for other applications as well. The other part I'll just quickly talk about is around frictionless privileged access. So if anyone's been doing privileged access management for a while, you know that this is a bit of a challenge, right? Initially we think it's going to be quite simple to deploy a privileged access management solution, but the reality is that this has been challenging for many organizations. And it's challenging for multiple reasons. These are just a couple of them that I'm just putting out there. The first one is clients. Now, our end users in this case, so for example, our Unix and Linux administrators or our Windows admins or our AD admins and gurus, they're using their existing tools and their existing clients, and they have been doing this for about 15, 20, 30 years, however long it's been. They've got an existing well-established process with their existing tools on how they log in and administer those systems. And now as part of a PAM solution, quite often what's happened is that we've said, you can no longer use your existing tools or your existing clients. You now need to use the PAM clients, right? Just think about that for a second from a user experience perspective. So if I'm a Linux admin, I've got all these shell scripts. I've got these bash scripts that have been written and crafted out that go and do all these different Linux administration tasks for me just by punching a couple of keys in my keyboard, right? I'm running the scripts. And now you've just stopped me from being able to do that. Right. So that's, again, you've negatively impacted the user experience. And that's been a real friction point for many organizations. The second point there is around agents. So quite often when you deploy a PAM solution, a lot of PAM solutions rely on agent-based technology. So you'd say, well, deployment of an agent's not too bad, right? So you get one of these things deployed, but the other problem comes with maintaining the agents. So it's not just about getting these things deployed. Seems simple enough to go and install it, but the reality is for organizations, it's not that simple as pressing the install.exe button. You need to control this. You need to go through change management. You need to go through testing. It's got to be added as part of the operating environment, right? It's got to be packaged. It's got to be deployed through your processes, and then it's got to be maintained. And then you've got to consider what happens when you get operating system updates or other application and system updates and how that will impact the agent, right? So you've got to go through a whole testing cycle of that. This is now being a friction point for the BAU teams. So as part of the IT administration teams who need to go and administer these systems on a regular basis or look after the environments, this is now one more thing that they have to go and look after and manage and maintain and continue to operate. The other side is around process changes. So if you consider, for example, consider how you'll have external service providers, and the external service providers have SLAs to manage your environments, right? So by introducing a PAM technology, a lot of these actually change the process in such a drastic way that it impacts the SLAs, right? So that causes more issues over there. Overall, the entire user experience has been negatively impacted by a lot of PAM technologies in this space. So I guess the question is, well, what if none of these were a challenge anymore? What if we can get to a point where you can actually deploy a privileged access management technology, a PAM solution, a PAM strategy, without having to face these challenges about end clients or agents or, sure, there's going to be some kind of a change to a process, but have a technology that adapts closer to the existing processes that are in play, rather than having to reinvent every single one of them. So let's take a quick look at the type of different users who need privileged access. We'll start from there. You've got three basic user types. I'll just pick on these guys for a second. You've got a system administrator, you have a developer, and you have a contractor. And each one of these different user types need to get access to your different applications, your systems, your databases, whether it's, again, on-prem or in the cloud or wherever they may reside. And each one of these guys have a different way of getting access into those systems. They use different tools or different front ends, but they also have different system access requirements. Your system administrator might be using, for example, opening up a remote desktop session into the Windows server to go and do some maintenance, whereas the developer doesn't really need a remote session in the typical RDP type use case. So the developer needs like an API or a protocol level access, right? The contractor is a bit different again, because a contractor now might be an external service provider who's coming in from a different location using their own company issued devices or laptops, computers to go and get that access. Each one of these guys are now being impacted by having to add an additional client or having to go through additional barriers to get through into the application. So when we talk about frictionless privileged access, what we're really getting to is actually getting rid of the entire client. If you're using, for example, as a Windows administrator, you might be using things like the built-in RDP tool within Windows operating systems, or you might be using other tools like mRemote NG or whatever it may be, right? Any kind of remote desktop management type tool. So imagine being able to provide the user the ability to say, well, whatever you're using now, whether it's that or it's PuTTY or whatever tool it is, continue using it. You can still continue using that. Everything's going to be recorded. Everything's going to be all secured. But you can continue using the exact same tool that you've been doing and keep doing the same job that you've been doing this whole time with no changes. Right. That's an awesome outcome. Like, I know many Linux administrators who'd love to hear that they can still use PuTTY and still use the various versions that they have and different types of shell scripting and different SSH tools to manage their Linux fleet. Right. From a developer perspective, developers aren't so much interested in a lot of the tools. Developers quite often need API level access. They need access to a protocol or to an API. So what if you can provide that access to them? Say, well, actually, you don't even need to go to an interface to go and get that credential. Here's a couple of lines of code. Embed this, put this within your application. Call this API endpoint. Call this REST API endpoint, and then you can go and get whatever you need from there, whether it's a session or it's a password or it's whatever it's got to be, right? And again, same deal for the contractor. So a contractor who's coming in, maybe from a VPN, using their own devices. And the next step is getting them access into your application, but being able to record absolutely everything that's happening. Record and put that level of control around it without having to force them to use a new client, or without even having to force them to take a change to their existing process. So they can continue doing what they've been doing and serving for your organization, with their existing processes, but you can implement that level of control and that security over the top of that. And finally, it's about no agents. Deploying one of these things has to be quick. It can't take too long, right? And it's got to be easy to maintain. So taking an agentless approach over here, so getting rid of the whole agent stuff, then you can actually get to that point where you're removing that friction from your internal operations, from having to go and maintain these things. So 2 quick examples that I talked about when we talk about frictionless security and what that means to a lot of organizations. Just the third quickly just touch on is around identity governance and administration. So identity manager, for example, a lot of people will see identity management as being a bit of an automation type tool or as a security tool, right? But at the same time, you got to remember, identity manager is also a business enabler. Business, and what it does is it makes sure that your employees have the correct levels of access, that all that's been granted them on day one. So when they join your company on day one, they have exactly what they need based on the type of person that they are, based on the job and the function that they do, right? That's a business enabler. That's powerful right there in its own. Obviously, from a security perspective, you want to make sure that when an employee leaves your organization, that all their access is terminated as well, right? So identity manager, again, provides that, and that's more of a security requirement. But also, you got to think of from enabling a business user, it's about the end user being able to request or just select what they need access to and have that provision to them automatically whenever they need it. Regardless of if they need it on day one or if they need it on day 100. They should go to the system and say, well, hey, now I need access to this application to perform function X, and being able to request that and have that provision to them automatically, right? But it's also not just the end user side, but think about it from a business owner perspective, right? So let's say, for example, a project manager. So if I'm the project owner or a project manager, I want to be able to view what the team members the team members that are a part of my project, but also the different applications that they get access to, or the different resources, I should say, because it's not just applications, it's also data, right? It might be different file systems, Windows shares or devices, or a SharePoint site, or whatever it is, right? A Confluence site. The different resources that they get access to as their role within a team in my project. Obviously, if something's missing, being able to add it in by themselves and be able to revoke access or revoke people from, add people into the team and remove them when they're no longer in there. Finally, from a business owner is also around their own applications. So providing that ability for a business owner, especially in financial services, a lot of large industries and a lot of large organizations, you have different business owners, right? And each one of these guys are a stakeholder as part of your identity governance programs, where being able to provide that capability to that business owner and say, here's your Okay, I think I was just disconnected there.
Hello, sorry. I don't know what happened.
It just seemed to kick me off. That's okay.
Okay, you're back on, but I just need to basically see where it is. All right, you can continue going. Go ahead.
I'm just trying to share my screen, Jeffrey, and that's saying.
No worries. I thought I dropped, so.
Oh no, so it was me too. So it must have impacted everybody. Be able to enable the screen sharing for me.
Sure.
Thank you. Just let me know once that comes through.
Okay. It's done. Go ahead.
Through? Excellent. Thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So what I was really saying there is just around how identity management is not just a security console, but it's also a business enabler for your organization, where what it does is really gives you that capability to define that security controls, all the policies, all the, the SOD type of controls and different rules that need to apply, but gives that line of business owner, the business owner or the business manager who is responsible for this, gives them the ability to actually own the content and own the data, right? Let them define what they need. Whereas the identity side applies the controls on top and make sure it's secure and compliant. So just a couple of things, getting close to wrapping up, around some of the user perceptions that prevent adoptions around new security habits. So this, just three basic things that you can quite often see with a lot of organizations, right? Firstly, it's security is burdensome. It's hard, it's difficult. It's one more thing that we need to go and do. It's adding more controls and stuff like that, right? And sometimes the user perception around here is that, it may even slow productivity. For example, if it's another click or a type, I won't do it. If it's one more thing that we have to press and select and so on. That's one of the user perceptions there. The other one is, some users quite often see as MFA as just being another password. They say that the login process is just a bit too rigid. And finally is around the privilege access management. And we've talked a fair bit about this already, but it's about, privilege access just being a pain, or it's just too difficult to get through. It's all these new specialized tools and agents, and it's a change to our processes. And we've been doing this stuff for a long time, and we know what we're doing, kind of stuff. And now you're asking us to change, right? It's a common user perception that you need to get through. 3 simple steps that you can probably take for your organizations, to help pass this and get to more of a frictionless security practice for your companies. Firstly, it's around using security solutions, which actually promote a comprehensive approach. And what I mean by that is solutions which you can't just treat security, especially around identity. You can't just treat this as being its own silo, right? Treating everything as its own silo is where some of these problems originally stemmed from in the first place, right? By treating everything in different silos, that's how you ended up with 50 different passwords. Whereas if you treat this as more of a comprehensive approach and security is being integrated into your applications and part of all your different processes, you can actually get around some of that and get to the point where the security solution and the frameworks are actually an enabler, and it's helping the organization speed forward as they continue to change. A second thing actually is just around fostering an internal community of early adopters. And I think this is quite key, right? It's key for various reasons. If you can get different people in your organization maybe from different teams or business units or functional areas or departments, however your organization is structured, if you can get a small select group from different areas of your business, get them to buy in to your security strategy, right? Enable them, bring them up as an early adopter, and then get them to the point where they're now an evangelist and they're now promoting the security strategies and those technologies, the practice that you're promoting through there within their departments and teams. Something that's, it's actually a lot of organizations should be looking at doing, and it's not that difficult to do in many cases, right? And the third one here is actually around education. Education is absolutely key, to all of this before going through any kind of, buying whatever technology it is or whatever the new shiniest tool out there is in the market. It's actually about educating educating our users around that, right? Now, if you take this, for example, how a phishing scam keeps working. You think you've educated everyone, and maybe you've done a round of education campaigns already, right? Maybe at the beginning of the year or last year, you've already done one round of doing the education campaigns, you know, phishing attempts, watch out for these type of emails, don't click those links, all that kind of stuff. But the reality is you've got new employees who just came on board and maybe they haven't seen this before, right? So you've hit two of the people, but the third guy is going to say, okay, I'm going to give you my bank account number, right? So you want to make sure that the entire organization is constantly educated on just the security best practices here. And that's something that's very simple, again, that you can do internally to help promote this. And there's a lot of great resources out there online for that. Now, finally, just sort of wrap up, you know, what we'll get into is really security starts with identity. You know, identity is what controls to make sure that end users have the right levels of access to the right resource in all the right ways, and you can prove it. That's really what security is about. And it's only possible if you actually take a bit more of an identity-centric security strategy. So, you know, making identity a core of your cybersecurity as part of your central strategies, and having a comprehensive or a holistic approach to identity, really breaking down those silos, right? And trying to, you know, treating identity as being, well, this is authentication problem and that's a governance problem and this is going to be PAM problem or whatever problem it is, right? That approach really doesn't work, and that's where you end up with multiple silos and different identity repositories and a whole new world of complex and pain that you will need to deal with there. It's really about taking that holistic approach where you can actually just take a step back and just go, where, okay, it's an identity, and this is everything that's needed around that. So with that, thank you very much for your time. Is there any questions?
There's a few. Well, that is, well, you know, thank you, Serkans. So you also basically voiced out a lot of people concern, you know, privileged access is troublesome, is, you know, a lot of hassles, and these are not the first time I heard about it, and there's a lot of questions about it as well during a normal conferences that comes up. So I think you can see Mark questions online saying that, you know, any concern with loss of mobile device that has the mobile apps that grant secure access?
That's actually a good question there. You're right. So if we're now using mobile devices to secure access and authenticate and authorize users into our applications, well, what happens when the user loses their device, right? How do we protect against that? It's a good point. This is where some of the technologies actually already evolved, in that, you know, you've got biometric type capability that's embedded within your mobile phone. And I don't know anybody these days who doesn't have some level of biometric, whether it's you using the latest Apple iPhone or using an Android device or a Galaxy or whatever it may be. You know, using the face scan or using the fingerprint. So these technologies actually use the biometric capabilities of the endpoint of the device as well. So that provides that additional layer of security on top of that. The other thing as part of this is that a lot of these technologies will actually go and use, you know, additional data, like, for example, additional sensor data. Where is a device coming in from? The time of the day of the device. You know, is it within country? So if for an example, you're an employee who's based out of Sydney, and all of a sudden the device appears in Malaysia or in Singapore or somewhere else, right? So it's using that kind of information as part of the authentication process that enables additional layer of security on top as well.
Okay. I was just looking at presentations. When you say no agent, so who's going to basically manage all the changes and all of that stuff? I mean, it's just by the user itself, or it works on AI or machine learning?
So actually, okay, so what I mean by no agents is actually, of course, you still need somebody who needs to maintain this, right? These things don't feed and water themselves. Somebody has to keep on feeding and watering them and making sure that the systems are kept alive. And what I mean by no agents is actually around the deployment of these. So what I mean by that is, to get one of these systems up and running and get it out there in the environment, traditionally you'd have to go and impact and touch so many different endpoints. So if you've got 1,000 boxes out there, imagine going out to 1,000 different servers to go and implement an agent or something like that on there, right? By moving to a bit more of an agentless approach, you're actually using the native capabilities that are already available in those tools, protocols, UIs, and so on. Right? And that's where this gets to. It doesn't mean you don't need a system administrator. It's about how do you speed up the deployment.
Okay, understand. Because I was reading something. I'm sure. I'm not sure is that from your thing or something. Someone was telling me number of technology now enable machine learning or robots to basically act as an agent. Is that true for them?
Yeah, that's a really interesting part. So when you talk about things like machine learning and bots and RPA and some of the innovations that are coming out there it's actually quite exciting. It's a little area that I find very interesting. That's one of the parts that we're doing with machine learning is actually using a machine learning algorithm to baseline user behaviors. And what I mean by baselining is actually learning what the user does within the system, how the user interacts with the system, what systems do they access, what applications they access, what are the typical times of the day they log in with, where do you log in from, all that kind of data, but also around behavioral biometrics. So what I mean by behavioral biometrics is around, for example, the milliseconds in between keystroke combinations that you type. Do you use your left shift key or do you use your right shift key? Like next time you're typing, right? Anyone out there? Next time you're typing, or next time you're using your mouse and you're navigating through your windows and whatever you're doing, just pay attention a little bit to which shift key you use, right? You'll find that you might use the right more than the left or the left more than the right. Or when you're using your mouse, you'll find that you move, well, quite often I find myself, for example, I move my mouse in a bit of a circular motion, especially when I'm waiting for something. And it quite often goes anti-clockwise for some reason, but it's...
You can detect now. I mean, are you guys doing something to detect now? We have one question coming in. 1 second. Okay, what you just mentioned as a thing in your experience. So if we have, I think a lot of company now, I'm just going to add it into it, have some sort of, I think, identity access management. Whether they're happy or not, I'm not so sure. But how easy and how long does it take to deploy a full-fledged PAM system, privilege access management solution?
That's a really good point. And, that question is a bit like, how long is a piece of string type of question, because, all depends on the type of the organization over there. But, what I can tell you definitely there, what I can tell you from our experience, we've seen projects that have run for 12 months longer. We've seen projects run for such a long period of time, which they've just ran as a project for 12 months or more and haven't delivered any kind of outcome until the final end, until the 12 months or until the 18 months is up, until the entire project is complete. What we're finding is that organizations don't really want that. And from our experience, what we've shifted onto is taking more of a phase or a sprint-based approach, where you're actually delivering a business outcome, right? A real tangible business outcome or a capability back to the end users, to the business users, in a much shorter time frame, talking 3 to 4 months, by delivering that capability back, whether it might be the initial phase of doing some password rotation, for example, or you might go with, and it's really about actually what's important to the organization. You got to keep that in mind as well, right? Because, different organizations have different requirements, or there might be different factors that are influencing why they need to go about with an identity solution, or whether it's identity governance or PAM or authentication or whatever technology it is in this space. They all have slightly different requirements. So it's about making sure that you can get that problem addressed in a very short time frame and tackling it that way. One thing that really helps is, I've said it a couple of times already, is around that whole agentless and clientless approach. By building a solution which is based around being agentless and clientless and being an appliance-based product, it means that we can get into an environment and have the product ready in hours, in a number of hours, right? In a matter of hours, you have the base product ready for configuration and ready to start onboarding your applications and systems. That alone has actually been quite powerful for a lot of our customers to get these projects running and get it running at that quick rate. for them.
So you're saying I mean, for a larger company, because most of the time, most people that actually, I think, implements a PMS is actually for a company that actually, well, we're talking about 5,000 users or more, and like you say, 1,000 endpoint, and we're talking about 4 or 5 months only.
Correct.
Or roughly.
No, you're absolutely good question. You know, a lot of these companies we're talking about being able to deliver a capability in months.
Wow.
So
it's good. Now, there's one question. I'm not so sure that is a question or anything more, I think, to maybe challenge me or yourself. How safe are biometrics safeguarded? I don't think anything is safe these days. I don't think anyone can claim that. But would you like to take that?
Yeah, look, I sort of agree with you there, right? How safe? Well, you know, I guess it's as safe as the weakest link, right? If that somehow answers it. So it's not a single product that you're going to be looking at, or a single control or a mechanism. It's going to be, you're going to take it again from a holistic approach, right? Look at it holistically from the entire framework of the entire security strategy, and making sure that they all work together hand in hand. So when we're talking about biometric-based authentication, for example, using biometric authentication in combination with maybe telemetry, for instance, right? Being able to say biometrics plus geolocation and the time of the day, that will now add additional level of security on top of that. Right?
Okay. Now, last but not least, this one has been very quick because most of the people are staying on here for more than about 40 minutes now. Security. We all basically heard of COVID-19, big problem. Everyone work from home, unsecure network, whatever networks and stuff, that sort of thing. A lot of phishing campaign. We got one yesterday that someone asked me to click on it. It's actually from my own domain name, but it's actually complete fake or anything like that, because my IT guy was looking at this. He asked me, "You didn't click on it, did you?" I was like, "No, I don't even know what it is." How do they basically mitigate risk from this attack?
No, you're right. And, you know, it's like, you know, like I said, everything has really changed. And over here, the user education piece is definitely important again. And that's one of the biggest factors you need to be considering here. You can deploy all kinds of solutions and, you know, buy all kinds of things all day long. But if we don't educate the users in here, and what, you know, for example, in phishing attacks, right? You know, that little comic strip that I was showing earlier, you know, we may have trained 2 out of the 3, but it's got to be the third one eventually will give something up. And it's about making sure that users know what to look for. You know, if we talk about phishing specifically, you know, the basics, right? Just making sure that the email, you know, the from email is actually who you expect it to be. You know, the display name and the from may not always match, right? There's not a lot of people know that. Just think twice before you open attachments, before you click on that link. Just hover over that hyperlink. You know, I've been caught out myself, actually, personally, from a phishing attack, and I don't know if it was exactly from the phishing, but it was how it was crafted. But the timing of everything was just perfect, and it's just really about just checking twice the type of questions that it's asking you and the type of links that's been presenting. So that's definitely very important over there as well.
Okay. We do have to end here, but I'm going to basically summarize this. So, Serkan, I also basically noticed that you work around in Asia. Your client from Philippines, Malaysia, and obviously Australia, Southeast Asia. You know, there's a campaign going out at the moment because a lot of government are giving out money. So we get this tax, especially Malaysian. They get this tax and say that if you click on this, you straight away can claim X amount, how many ringgits or how many peso or anything like that. Yeah. Do not click on those clicks. And that's what it is. Any last word before we conclude this particular webinar?
No, that was it. Thank you very much for having your time. We're actually, just one last thing if I can quickly add, we are about to release something new to help really, you know, with the whole COVID-19 outbreak right now in this pandemic. We've got a lot of organizations out there who are trying to help us, you know, your critical services providers, for example, and we're just about to release something, hopefully overnight or early tomorrow morning, you should see it. It's just around something that we're trying to do to help those organizations in maintaining security whilst they're trying to maintain and help and protect us from this virus. So,
okay, well, thank you so much. If you can leave your email in the chat box for participants that like to basically get back to you or ask any questions direct to you, please do. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for this, for your patience and also coming today and attend all the sessions at the Access Livestream webinar. Again, this webinar is not to replace the conference. The conference will take place when the pandemic is slowed down and the government allows us. Give a welcome, thank you, applause to Serkan for this particular great presentation. Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
Bye-bye.